Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. To Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the remote backcountry of central Alaska, to the Chusana River and all of its rigor and difficulty. To the south lies Wrangell St. Elias National Park and its impressive mountains and glaciers. The Canadian border is about 40 miles to the east, depending on how tight you pull the measuring tape. The national park takes up about 13.2 million acres of as close to wilderness as you can find today, and to the north of the park is a 4.9 million acre reserve. This means that the land can be hunted and used, but it is a protected area from the encroachment of civilization. In contrast, you cannot hunt in the national park portion. The area here is mostly rolling hills with elevations that can dip below 2,000 feet, in contrast to the majestic mountains of the nearby park. It is mostly muskeg, which is a Cree word for a low-lying swamp. It is covered with trees dwarfed by the poor soil conditions and tufts of floating grass, giving it an illusion of solid ground. Here you'll find lots of peat-like material which can go 30 feet deep and act like quicksand. Along the edges of the muskeg where the soil is, you'll find black and white spruce, willows, alders, and wildflowers. Caribou and moose are common, and the predators here include wolves, lynx, foxes, and black and brown bears. It is in this beautiful setting that our episode takes place today. In the late afternoon on Saturday, September 19th of 2020, 22-year-old Austin Pfeiffer's moose hunt had culminated in success. He and his friend, whom we'll call Matthew, shot a nice bull and tracked it until they found it dead. They gutted it and decided to return in the morning to finish cutting the carcass into packable sections and moving it back toward their camp. Austin was from Belleville, Ohio, and was an avid outdoorsman, enjoying fishing and hunting whenever he had the chance. Whenever Austin wasn't at work, he was out enjoying nature, hiking on trails and the like. But when he was at work, he worked hard as a foreman for a local tree service company and also worked at Game Master Taxidermy in town. He was set to turn 23 years old on the coming Tuesday and had been married to his wife since October of 2018. He and Matthew had been planning this moose hunt for the past 2 years. As the young men approached their moose carcass, there was no obvious sign a bear had been near it. They hadn't noticed any tracks nor scat in the area. They paused briefly and admired the bull they'd harvested. Then they realized that the fun was over, and the work was about to begin. They worked out a system where Austin would partition the carcass into manageable pieces, and Matthew would pack them the half-mile back to their camp. They agreed to hang the partitions in a tree, but first had to move it to where the float plane could land, and they could load it. As Austin prepared to start cutting the carcass into sections, he carefully placed his backpack and hunting rifle on the ground only a few yards away. He certainly couldn't hold it while he worked cutting the moose up, and they were in the home stretch of the hunt anyway. Neither Matthew nor Austin brought bear spray, as they had their hunting rifles. What more do you need to protect yourself in bear country? After the two loaded and bound a large bag of the moose carcass onto the packboard, Austin helped Matthew get the pack up on his back, and away he went. Matthew walked the short distance back to camp in about 10 minutes or so, then turned around and headed back to pick up more. He undoubtedly anticipated that by the time he got back to the moose carcass, Austin would already have the next section ready for loading. As Matthew was walking through the dense vegetation about 50 yards from where the carcass was, he glanced up as a frightening scene filled his vision. He saw a large brown bear in full charge mode, steaming toward him. He immediately shouldered his rifle and fired a warning shot, then another, and one more. The bear continued toward him until it got within about 20 feet. Then it flinched, as if it had been struck by something, and veered off from its attack. Matthew watched as the bear continued out of the area and placed his rifle back across his shoulder so he could continue the carcass and Austin. Matthew came around some of the vegetation hiding the impromptu butchering site and saw Austin laying on the ground. He was clearly dead as his body was torn up by a bear, and possibly the bear he had just shot at. Matthew immediately began jogging back to camp and the radio there. He called out to the air taxi and relayed the details of Austin's condition. The air taxi service notified the Park Service and the Alaska Wildlife Troopers, and they flew out immediately. Officials noted that Austin's rifle and backpack were found a short distance from his body. It was apparently just out of reach by the time the bear surprised him with its attack. They figured that the bear had managed to creep up very close to him before he noticed it, as he worked on cutting up the moose, and the dense vegetation surrounding it would permit that. They conceived that it was even possible that the bear had attacked him before he knew it was there. The authorities investigated the attack scene and noticed signs that the bear had tried to cache at least a portion of the carcass. The ground was disturbed, and the portion of the carcass was covered with dirt and leaves. But they didn't know when this happened. Did it happen after the attack on Austin, or during the night before it? Officials said that the young men didn't do anything wrong in their safety practices. They said they found no evidence that any of Matthew's shots had injured the bear, and no sign it had stayed in the area. They followed the state laws and made sure to salvage all the meat from the moose carcass that they could. Since the park's founding in 1980, Austin Pfeiffer was the first person killed in a brown bear attack, although several people have disappeared in the park, never to be heard from again. When Austin's wife was notified of his death, she thought it was a terrible joke initially. She had a hard time coming to grips with the idea that he wouldn't be returning home to her. She says she's broken and sad that he's gone. She celebrates the wonderful memories they made in their short time together. His wife characterized her husband as a kind, caring, and patient man who loved her, as well as his friends and family. Well, that was a tearjerker, folks. After reading up on the details of this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think that bear spray could have prevented this attack? Do you think that the bear had been brought to the carcass by the smell of it being gutted? Do you think that this bear was a dinner bell bear, meaning that it had heard the report of the rifle and closed in to claim the carcass or its remains from hunters? I'll be glad to read your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a remote cabin in the Washakie Wilderness area. The Kitty Creek drainage is on the east edge of Yellowstone National Park and is brush-covered and rugged. The peaks in this area easily soar above 10,000 feet in elevation, and the valleys are crowded with dense stands of pine, fir, and aspen trees. Around every body of water, you will find broad stands of willow bushes. The animals of this area include moose, elk, and mule deer. Predators of this area include wolves, coyotes, mountain lions, as well as black bears and grizzly bears. The brown or grizzly bears here are interior bears who don't get the benefit of seasonal salmon runs and consequently are smaller and more aggressive. On June 17, 2010, there was a biological research team working on Kitty Creek drainage. As part of their protocol, warning signs indicating ongoing bear research in the area and informing hikers of the trail closures were posted at each trailhead leading into the area. They were shooting grizzly bears with tranquilizer guns and putting tracking collars on them. This allowed them to follow the bears on foot or from a helicopter to see where they go at different times of year. In addition to the collar, the scientists frequently tattoo the lip of the bears for identification. The bears are then followed for several years while data is gathered for analysis by the biologists. They had seen the Irwins at their nearby family cabin, located about a mile from the trapping site, but failed to mention the research they were conducting in the vicinity. In the morning, they had snared 2 grizzly bears in the Kitty Creek drainage. One of them was a 5 to 10-year-old, 430-pound male grizzly bear. They tranquilized the bear with a dart loaded with Telazol, a reliable bear sedative. Once the bear calmed down and stopped reacting to the stimulus from the researchers and showing the telltale open-eyed gaze the drug causes in bears, they quickly did their health assessments and placed the tracking collar. As soon as the drug begins to wear off, bears begin to blink their eyes rapidly, move their limbs, and smack their lips. Once the scientists see this reaction, they know that the bear will recover from the tranquilizer soon. So they leave the area immediately to let the bear come to its senses without incident. It was the end of the bear collaring season, and the scientific research team hadn't seen hikers in the drainage for their entire time there, which started on May 25th. They removed the signs posted warning people of the bear research underway on their way out. At about the same time that the bear was waking up from the tranquilizer, 70-year-old Irwin Evert was hiking up a nearby trail. Before he left, he told his daughter that he was planning on hiking up the bear research trapping area to see what the scientists were up to. He hadn't brought bear spray nor a firearm with him, as he and his son had run into bears frequently before, and never had any serious problems. A few days prior to this, Irwin had a chat with his part-time hiking buddy and retired biologist Chuck Neal. He told Irwin that there was a bear research team up near his cabin and warned him against venturing into the woods any time in the near future. Irwin even called Chuck about a week before his hike to inquire about the bear research signs posted near his cabin. For the prior 40 years, Irwin enjoyed time at their family cabin with his beautiful wife, Yolanda. He was very familiar with bears and just about everything else he might run into while he was in the forests. Irwin used the cabin as a base to explore the plant life in the area. He was a content transplant from Illinois and, for all practical intents and purposes, was now an unofficial native of the area. He was an excellent field botanist, and his magnum opus was his book titled Vascular Plants of the Greater Yellowstone Area. It was a guide to plants of this area and received acclaim from reviewers. He also knew the risks of entering into bear country and acknowledged that it is all part of the package. Bears like to be away from people, and the areas where bears live are frequently preferred by hikers. By late afternoon, Irwin was climbing up the trail. The peace of the early day had given way to gusts of wind, distorting sounds and twisting scents carried on the air. This is where the evidence gets a little confusing. The biologists contend that they had put up warning signs informing the public of the research they were doing on the bears in the area, but Irwin's family says the signs were removed prior to his hike. At any rate, Irwin hiked to the exact spot where the bear was nearly fully recovered from the tranquilizer. The researchers had left the area approximately 30 minutes before as the bear began to wake up. It is assumed that Irwin walked within threatening distance of the bear, and it responded to him as a perceived threat. It killed him in a violent attack that quickly took his life. He did not suffer, nor was any part of him eaten by the bear. When Irwin didn't return at his scheduled time, Yolanda called Chad Dickinson, a member of the interagency grizzly bear study team. He headed up to the trap site and found Irwin's remains in a remote point in the trail about 2 miles from the nearest road. The effort to recover his body finished up around 1 a.m. The precise attack details are not known, but the outcome was as terrible as any forensic reconstruction could detail. Wildlife agents immediately began a search for the bear. They tracked it using the newly placed collar and located it very close to the attack site. Agents killed the bear with a single shot fired from a hovering helicopter. DNA pulled from the bear's body conclusively supported that this was the bear that had killed Irwin. In the 33 years of researching bears, this was the first time a human fatality was connected to it. Wildlife biologist Dr. Servine indicated that the sedative used to knock the bears out is a dissociative drug, meaning that bears don't see people as they wake up. They are out of it long after the researchers leave the area. Therefore, it is impossible that the bear woke up enraged at people afterward. He describes anger as a human emotion and stated bears don't hold grudges. For those of you who may be wondering why the bear was killed, the reasoning behind this was that IGBST didn't know enough to exclude aggressive motives. The bear didn't eat Irwin, so a predatory attack was off the table. There were no cubs involved, as the bear was a boar, so it wasn't reacting in defense of cubs. The bear didn't have any obvious food caches nearby, so it wasn't defending its food. The experts were completely puzzled why the bear would kill Irwin, as well as why he would hike into a known bear research area. Yolanda later filed a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against the federal government. She maintained that the warning signs had been removed, which Irwin interpreted as an all-clear to hike the area. This event has led to reforms in how bear research is conducted, and now signage is left for at least 1 day after the research is finished, and an agent observes the bear to ensure it is healthy and leaves the area. Yolanda's lawsuit was rejected by a federal judge in 2013. After reviewing the conflicting and confusing details of this case, I have a few questions for you. Do you think that Irwin walked right into the groggy bear and surprised him into defending himself? Do you think the bear may have smelled the researchers after they left, and that triggered the attack upon him smelling Irwin? Why do you think Irwin hiked directly into an area he knew bear research was underway? Was this attack a territorial attack or a defensive attack? If Irwin had packed bear spray or a firearm, would events possibly turned out different? I will enjoy reading your comments, so please post them in the comment section below and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the wilds of central Alaska, just northeast of Denali National Park. The area of Ferry lays along the Nenana River and is losing people quickly. In the 2020 census, it was listed as having 17 residents, down almost 50% from the prior census, which indicated 33 residents. Our story doesn't happen in the village, though, as the subjects of our episode traveled 5 miles into the more primitive areas nearby. Common evergreen trees of the area include black and white spruce and Sitka spruce, with stands interrupted by quaking aspen, black locust, and paper birch thickets. In riparian zones, alder bushes provide a dense lower canopy through which trails meander. This area has a rolling topography as it sits on the northern slope of the Alaska Range. The animals of this area include moose and caribou, with the main predators being black bear, wolves, and brown bear. It is in this majestic setting that our episode takes place today. In the fall of 1985, Ben Moore was a carpenter by trade and helped out in civil engineering projects. He had hunted for moose with his 14-year-old son Ty around the Blair Lakes area, with nothing but sore feet to show for it. His friends felt sorry for his lack of success this year, so in a last-ditch effort they offered to accompany them to the area around Ferry to moose hunt. The group had previously dropped a camp trailer to hunt from on the far side of the old metal bridge, and planned to drive across the bridge to hunt on the far side of the river. They arrived at the camp trailer in the early evening, the night before they planned to hunt. About 5 in the morning, the hunters climbed out of bed and hopped into a jeep and a station wagon to drive up the mountain road across the bridge to get to their hunting area. Ben rode with his friend Richard in the jeep, and Ty rode with the other hunters in the roomier station wagon. At a fork in the road, the two vehicles separated and explored the promising area for game. As they scanned the dense scrub brush for the gleaming antlers of a bull moose, they took in the clear sky and fall colors that surrounded them. There were strong gusts of wind, but even this makes for a nice day in Alaska. After a few hours of driving and stopping periodically to glass areas, they decided to pull the jeep up on a ridge and look over the country a bit more. The wind was gusting so strongly that glassing from the jeep was more comfortable, and they could see just about everything they wanted to see. They looked for a good vantage point to park the vehicle and began glassing. As Ben rounded the hill, he carefully navigated the slope and stayed out of brushy areas so as not to surprise any bear or moose. As he emerged into a large clearing, Ben pulled up his binoculars to glass the area. His field of view was quickly filled with a large, brown, fuzzy image. Whatever it was so close his binoculars couldn't focus on it. He quickly took his binoculars from his eyes and felt his heart drop as he could see a large brown bear just 100 or so feet from him. The bear immediately stood up his hind legs, lifting his head above the brush, and began to investigate just what Ben was. It opened and closed its mouth a few times, and bobbed up and down, seemingly unsure of just what to do with this person appearing so close, so suddenly. It apparently made up its mind as it disappeared once again into the brush and got back down on all fours. Ben had studied how to behave around bears, as he was an avid outdoorsman. He knew if he didn't do anything drastic, like screaming or running, the bear may well just amble away. He stood still and focused on relaxing in a desperate hope to somehow convey a non-threatening attitude toward the bear. Suddenly the brush exploded with snapping branches and cracking as Ben watched a brown blur streaking toward him. At his side, Ben carried a .357 Magnum pistol, a single-action revolver. By the time he could pull the gun and cock the hammer, the bear was within arm's length of him. He frantically squeezed the trigger and felt his hand kick in reaction to the shot. The bullet hit the bear square in the chest, but it didn't stop or even acknowledge the impact of the bullet. As the bear ran past Ben, it clasped its jaws on his right leg and slung him over its shoulder. It then flung him backward, sending him crashing onto a large rock. Just as Ben felt himself land,
He also felt the bear biting into his right leg. It hadn't even missed a step in the entire process of throwing him, and was now tearing at the muscle and skin of his right leg. Somehow Ben managed to hold on to his pistol while being flung through the air. He quickly pointed the pistol toward the bear and fired, but it was a clean miss. The stress and adrenaline of the encounter had him shaking and unsure of himself, but the bear was sure of what it wanted to do. The bear's underside was now just above Ben, so he cocked the revolver again and fired into its gut. He saw a huge wound open up in the bear's stomach and blood poured out onto him. The bear became even more enraged with the pain, and it diverted its attack to his head. It locked its jaws onto his head and shook him violently from side to side after picking him up off the ground. Ben could hear and feel the bones of his face cracking in the bear's massive jaws. Then it threw him to the ground, onto his back. For a brief second it stood over him and glared at him, with its head near his and its mouth opened wide. Just as Ben began to move, the bear lowered its mouth toward his head again, but he quickly cocked his revolver and stuck it into the bear's mouth. The bear's jaws closed around Ben's hand and the pistol just as he fired it. The bear didn't drop dead. Instead, it shook a bit and then moved its head from side to side, as if trying to stop the burning from the blast in his mouth. It quickly swiped at the pistol in recognition of the source of its pain, but Ben grasped it firmly now with both hands. The bear slowly turned and staggered its way across the clearing and back into the brush. As the bear disappeared, Ben struggled to his feet. As he stood, his right leg collapsed and he fell back to the ground. Being both tough and stubborn, he climbed back to his feet and firmly stamped his injured right leg into place as if to convince it to work. The bear's teeth had torn his face horribly, and he couldn't see to reload the revolver. Ben was now irritated and mad. He hadn't done anything to deserve such a mauling, and the bear wasn't protecting cubs or a food cache that he knew of. He bellowed a challenge to Bear and declared he had one more round left in his pistol. Ben could do nothing to remove himself due to his injuries, so he waited and tried to gather himself and think about what to do. Richard heard only one of the shots from the revolver and soon appeared at the top of the small ridge. He hollered out optimistically, "Did you get a moose?" But Ben's reply was a disappointing statement. "No, a bear got me." Richard incredulously asked Ben what he said, but Ben's confirmation of the events brought him down to Ben's aid. Upon seeing the damage inflicted by the bear, Richard was shaking and nervous. He helped Ben make his way back to the Jeep and immediately began driving back to the trailer, about 5 miles down the rough mountain road. The men had driven about 100 feet or so before the Jeep quit running. Richard cautiously got out and slid underneath the vehicle while keeping a wary eye out for the bear. He banged on the malfunctioning fuel pump and once again started the Jeep. As they drove along the road, they reached out to the rest of their hunting group on the CB radio, but heard no reply. As is so common in these types of stories, as soon as the Jeep had reached the bridge that crossed the river, they ran into 2 paramedics. They had heard the cry for help over the CB radio and had called for additional help. Just as they arrived back at the trailer, an ambulance pulled up and out jumped 3 more paramedics. The paramedics were met with a gruesome sight. Ben's nose hung loosely from his face. They pushed it back into place and wrapped gauze around his entire head, even covering his eyes. They also put an inflatable splint around his leg before loading him into the ambulance and speeding toward the hospital 5 hours away in Fairbanks. As the paramedics tried to insert an IV to give him fluids, they discovered his veins had collapsed from the trauma and shock of the event. Each time Ben tried to lay down, blood seeped into his throat, causing him to cough and choke. He was forced to sit up the entire drive to the airport. Ben's leg was swelling so much that the splint had to be removed, adding to his pain and discomfort with each bump they hit. The entire ride to the airport, the paramedics didn't give him anything for pain, due to him being in a state of shock. The pain in his leg was overriding any other sense of pain in his face. Richard had to smile as he stared into Ben's shredded face and listened to him complain about pain in his thumb. Upon examination, they found a piece of one of the bear's claws had completely pierced Ben's thumb and protruded through the other side a small distance. Ben endured a 5-hour ambulance ride to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital without pain medications. Upon arriving at the hospital, Ben's head was x-rayed, and he underwent a 4-hour surgery. He stayed in the hospital for 2 more weeks. Over the next 2 years, he would have so many surgeries he has lost count. A plastic surgeon worked on reconstructing Ben's nose over several months, but had a very hard time as all of his facial bones were shattered during the attack. After reconstruction of his nose was complete, he had no feeling in it. Ben thanks God that Ty was not with him and still suffers from nightmares from his bear attack. Ty's presence at the attack would have traumatized him too if he had managed to avoid being attacked as well. The resources I have never indicated the age, sex, or condition of the bear, and didn't indicate if it survived its wounds from Ben's revolver. After reading the research on this bear attack, I am left with several questions. What do you think Ben could have done to avoid this bear attack? Would his rifle have helped him stop the attack? What would have happened if Ben's son Ty had been with him? Do you think the bear survived? I will look forward to reading your responses, so post them in the comments section below this video and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.